Zeitoun, page 68, middle of the page. Sunday, August 28th. Kathy woke before dawn and turned on the TV. Katrina was now a Category 5 storm, with winds over 150 miles an hour. It was heading almost directly toward New Orleans, with the brunt of it expected to strike about 16 miles west of the city. Meteorologists were predicting furious winds, 10-foot storm surges, possibilities of levee breaches, flooding, and everywhere along the coast. It was estimated that the storm would reach the New Orleans area that night. Throughout the day, as news of the hurricane grew more dire, clients called Kathy or Zeitoun, asking them to secure their windows and doors. Kathy collected requests and relayed them to Zeitoun. Zeitoun discovered that one of his carpenters, James Crusoe, was still in the city, so the two of them spent the day driving around, rigging the houses on the list. James's wife worked for one of the hotels downtown, and the couple was planning to ride the storm out there. Zeitoun and James drove from job to job, a quarter of a ton of plywood in the back of the truck, doing what they could before the winds came. The roads were still crowded, a new surge of cars leaving, but Zeitoun didn't consider it. He would be safe in their house on Dart Street, he figured, far from any levees, with 2 stories, plenty of tools, and food. Mid-morning, Mayor Negan ordered the city's first ever mandatory evacuation. Anyone who could leave must leave. All day, Zeitoun and James saw people lined up at bus stops, those who planned to stay in the Superdome, families, couples, elderly men and women carrying their belongings in backpacks, suitcases, garbage bags. Seeing them exposed like that, as the winds picked up and the sky darkened, worried Zeitoun. He and James passed the same groups, waiting patiently, on the way to their job sites and on their way back. In Baton Rouge, the weather was dark and unruly. High winds, black skies at noon. The kids played outside for a while, but then came inside to watch DVDs while Kathy caught up with Patty and Marianne. The trees in the neighborhood swung wildly. The power went out at 5 o'clock. The kids played board games by candlelight. Kathy periodically went out to the car to listen to the news on the radio. The winds were smashing windows in New Orleans, knocking down trees and power lines. Kathy tried to call Zeitoun, but the call went straight to his voicemail. She tried the home phone, nothing. The lines were down. She assumed the hurricane had not hit the city yet, and she had no way to reach her husband. By 6 o'clock, Zeitoun had dropped James off and was home and ready. He watched the news on TV. The reporters had not changed much. The outermost edge of the hurricane was expected about midnight. He assumed that would be the end of the electrical grid for a few days. Walking through the darkening room, Zeitoun assessed all the possible dangers he would face during the storm. The house had 4 bedrooms, the master bedroom on the first floor, and the kids' bedrooms upstairs. He expected leaks up there. Portions of the roof might be compromised. A few windows might break. The front sitting room with its bay windows was at risk. There was an outside chance the tree in the backyard would fall on the house. If that happened, there would be significant damage, because nothing, then, could keep the water out. But he was optimistic, and in any case, he wanted to be in the house, on which he had spent untold thousands for improvements, to protect it in whatever way possible. His grandmother had stayed put during countless storms in her home on Arwood Island, and he planned to do the same. A home was worth fighting for. The only thing that concerned him was the levees. Again and again, the news reported warnings of the storm surge. The levees were meant to hold back 14 feet of water, and the storm surges into the Gulf were already 20 feet high. If the levees were breached, he knew the battle would be lost. He called Kathy at 8 o'clock. "There you are," she said. "You disappeared." He looked at his phone and saw that he'd missed 3 calls from her. "Coverage must be spotty already," he said. His phone had not rung. He told her that nothing significant had happened yet, just strong winds, nothing new. "Stay away from the window," she said. He said he would try. Kathy wondered aloud if there was something foolish in what they were doing. Her husband was in the path of a Category 5 hurricane, and they were talking about staying away from the windows. "Say goodnight to the kids," he said. She said she would. "Better go, to save the battery," he said. They said goodnight. The kids asleep, Kathy on the couch in her brother Andy's house, and stared at the candle in front of her. It was the only light left on in the house. Just after 11 o'clock, the front end of the storm arrived at Zeitoun's house. The sky was a brutal gray, the wind swirling and cool. Rains came in sheets. Every half hour brought an escalation in the mayhem outside. At midnight, the power went out. The leaks began at about 2 or 3. The first was in the corner of Nadama's bedroom. Zeitoun went down to the garage and retrieved a 40-gallon garbage can to catch the water. Another leak opened a few minutes later, this one in the upstairs hallway. Zeitoun found another garbage can. A window in the master bedroom broke just after 3 o'clock, as if a brick had been thrown through the glass. Zeitoun gathered the shards and stuffed the opening with a pillow. Another leak opened in Sophia and Aisha's room. He found another bigger garbage can. He dragged the first 2 garbage cans outside and dumped them on the lawn. The sky was a child's finger painting, blue and black, hastily mixed. The wind was cooler. The neighborhood was utterly dark. As he stood on the lawn, he heard a tree fall somewhere on the block, crack, and then a smush, a shush, as the branches pushed down through the other trees and rested against the side of a house. He went inside. Another window had broken. He stuffed another pillow into it. Branches clawed at the walls, the roof. There were unknown thumps everywhere. The bones of the house seemed to be moaning under the strain of it all. The house was under assault. When he next checked, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. He hadn't stopped moving in 5 hours. If the damage continued at this pace, it would be worse than he had predicted, and the real storm hadn't come yet. In the small hours, Zeitoun had a thought. He didn't expect the city to flood, but he knew a flood was not impossible. So he walked outside, tasting the cool wind, and dragged his second-hand canoe from the garage and righted it. He wanted to have it ready. If Kathy could only see him now. She had rolled her eyes when she saw him come home with a canoe. He'd bought it a few years before from a client in Bayou St. John. When the client was moving, Zeitoun had seen it on the lawn, a standard aluminum model, and asked him if he was selling it. The client laughed. "You want that?" he asked Zeitoun. Bought it on the spot for $75. Something about the canoe had intrigued him. It was well made, undamaged, with a pair of wooden benches inside. It was about 16 feet long, built for 2 people. It seemed to speak of exploration, of escape. He tied it to the top of his van and brought it home. Through the living room window, Kathy saw him pull up. She met him at the door. "No way," she said. "What?" Zeitoun said, smiling. "You're crazy," she said. Kathy liked to act exasperated, but Zeitoun's romantic side was central to why she loved him. She knew that any kind of boat reminded him of his childhood. How could she deny him a used canoe? She was fairly certain he would never use it, but having it in the garage, she knew, would mean something to him, a connection to the past, the possibility of adventure, whatever it was. She wouldn't stand in the way. He did try 2 or 3 times to get his daughter's interest in the canoe. He brought them to Bayou St. John, put the canoe in the water, and sat down inside. When he reached for Nadama standing on the grass, she refused. The younger girls weren't having it either. So, for half an hour, as the girls watched from the grass, he paddled around by himself, trying to make it all look fun, irresistible. Then, when he returned, they still wanted no part of it. So he put the canoe back on the roof of the van, and they all went home. The wind picked up after 5 o'clock. He couldn't tell when the hurricane actually made landfall, but the day barely brightened that morning. It went from black to a charcoal gray, the rain like pebbles thrown against glass. He could hear tree limbs succumbing to the wind, great exhalations as the trunks fell on streets and roofs. Eventually, he could not stay awake. Though his house was under attack, he lay down, knowing something would awaken him soon enough, and so, surrendering for now, he fell into a shallow sleep.